very good evening to you, and welcome to this evening's edition of Politics 101, our midweek edition. Welcome all of you down to the program. If you're joining us from Guyana, welcome to Politics 101. If you're joining us from our Caribbean region, not our Caribbean islands, our Caribbean region. The Caribbean has always been a regional construct, not an island construct. What do they know of the Caribbean who only the Caribbean knows? I'm paraphrasing the great C.L.R. James. Welcome to you if you're joining us from our Caribbean. A special welcome to the people of Antigua and Barbuda. Lots of Guyanese there. Welcome to you. If you join us from Trinidad and Tobago, welcome. And, Guyana lost today badly to Trinidad and Tobago in the Super 50, all out for 105. And you can't win. You can't win a 50 over match by being bowled out for 105 all season. Our batting has been found wanting. Once again, we're beaten by Trinidad. In the last 18 encounters between Guyana and Trinidad has beaten us 16 times. Welcome to you if you're joining us from Trinidad and Tobago. Hope you're going to be able to put a smile on your face by the time we finish this program. We have the leader of the opposition on tonight, Mr. Aubrey Norton. He is here, and we're going to get going in a couple of minutes. Good evening to you if you're joining us from North America. Those of you joining us from Canada, from the United States of America, big shout out to those of you who are joining us from Brooklyn. And I see a lot of Aubrey Norton people lining up here. My friend Orrin Newton is an Aubrey man, joining us from Buxton. Good evening, all of you joining us from Buxton and Annandale, my Congo people from Annandale. And I'm instructed, I must always, Lynette Greenwood, good evening to you. Good night to you, good morning. If you're joining us from the United Kingdom or France, it's morning there. Welcome to Politics 101. And not forgetting those of you, I see someone is joining in from Cleveland, Ohio. Good evening to you. And good news coming out of Cleveland, coming out of Ohio, sorry, Paul Henry, Ohio voting down that attempt to ban abortion in the state. Was a good night for the abortion rights people and Ohio. Good evening to my brother Kenneth DeFlorement, who's joining from my U.S. home, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., Virginia, Baltimore, the metropolitan area. Welcome to all of you. And I know that Aubrey Norton has some fans there in Maryland area, Maryland, Washington, D.C. There's a PNC group there, quite vibrant. And I met a Norton. I met a Norton when we were there a couple of weeks ago, and the young lady came up to me, "Sometimes you don't know me," and I stumbled for a bit, and she said, "Look at me, look at the cheeks, look at me." I look well. She had to help me. Aubrey Norton's daughter, who was there, was good, running into, very proud of her daddy, and so on. And I know she's going to be on tonight. Welcome to all of you, our brothers and sisters there in Paramaribo, Cayenne, you all know Atamba, French Guyana, and Suriname. Welcome to Politics 101. So please share the link. I can't do the story like Mr. Duncan. Share the damn link, man. It don't come too good from me. But you all know the story. Share the link. Let everyone know that we're on tonight, and we have the opposition leader on tonight. We did tell you last night that he is going to be on tonight. So welcome everyone to Politics 101, and we are ready to roll because we have enough of you have assembled, and so we're going to roll. Let's start off with a clip, from Mr. Norton, because we're going to start with the Venezuelan issue. That is the big issue that is in the news, and you all know my stance on the Venezuelan thing here. I hear people say, drop everything and we national unity and stand up to the Venezuelans and so on. I don't mind all of that. I don't mind all of that. But Venezuela is one of the issues, the clear and present dangers that we face. One of them. I don't know the opposition leader's views. He's going to say that here tonight. But for me, I'm not dropping everything else of Venezuela. Venezuela is part of a clear and present danger, a larger clear and present danger, one plank of it that we are facing as Guyanese. We are facing poverty, the danger of poverty. We are facing the danger of the very government that is ruling Guyana. We are facing the danger of a rigged election, that is being the Venezuelan thing being manipulated. This is me, David Hines. So we're not giving up one blade of grass, not one jamoon, but we also not giving up one vote via rigging. You all hear me? So we're not falling for the PPP's nonsense, so that we fold up everything and say, not a blade of grass, one damn vote extra via rigging. That's also very important. And of course, Venezuela has to be seen within the context of the larger global happenings. Two wars. The war there in the Middle East, and the war there in the Ukraine. So here we are. We're going to start with a clip from Mr. Norton in Parliament on Monday, and then we're going to take it from there. Let's listen to Mr. Norton speaking in Parliament on Monday.
Mr. Burnham, the late leader of our party, also a man of strategic insight, said at the summit conference of CARICOM states held in Jamaica in 1982 that the threat to Guyana represented a threat to the entire Caribbean community. I believe this is a message we must carry to the Caribbean community. He went on to say that if Guyana loses 5/8 of its territory, CARICOM would be greatly diminished. Lastly, and in this context, we must keep at the front of our minds that Venezuela has already taken over Bird Island, which was once owned by Dominica, and has made inroads into the Eastern Caribbean states through the mechanism of Petro-Caribe. And economic largesse had made inroads into our support among these states. It is in this context I want to recommend to this House that the government should develop a proper system of sending envoys to engage these Caribbean leaders, so that outside of the general CARICOM support, we can regain and maintain the support of their individual countries. It is critical. Only recently, a Caribbean politician called on Guyana and Venezuela to ensure that the Caribbean remains a zone of peace. I could not believe that. I could not believe that, honestly. I cannot accept that a Caribbean sister state will cast us in that kind of light. But they haven't said that. Are we to conclude that Guyana has threatened the territorial integrity and sovereignty of any state in the Caribbean? We never did. Have we issued decrees to take over another state's maritime space? We never did. Have we rejected the decisions of any international tribunal? We never did. It was Venezuela that did. And therefore, to say Guyana and Venezuela must ensure a zone of peace is classic IPAS, because we have always maintained that there must be the peaceful resolution of this matter. And it is really disturbing that, I didn't call name. It is really disturbing that a Caribbean nation can say that and implicate Guyana when Guyana basically lacked the means militarily to even conceptualize that approach, much less implement it. And so I think it is necessary that the opposition put on record that we disagree totally with that position. Mr. Speaker, before I close, there are 2 points I want to make. The resolution is clear, and I want to read. In 4 it says, supports the government in its pursuit to ensure a peaceful and lawful resolution of the controversy before the International Court of Justice, and reject the proposal to return to any form of dialogue with Venezuela on the controversy outside of the process before the court. I raise this because I raised with my good friend and villager, the Prime Minister, that I don't think it is appropriate for us to say we will have no dialogue with Venezuela. This language was carved to establish that we will not dialogue on the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy, which is before. But as people running a government, you can never close the door totally. So, well, it's not the first time you're wrong. So, that was in light of it. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it is our task to rally all Guyanese in support of this country. But I would not be truthful to myself if I say I believe the government is doing everything necessary. I think there is need for more action. I think there is need for more public education. I think there is need for more involvement of our people. Our people will only be with us if we involve them. And so I want to stress that. And to conclude by saying, the government has, the people of Guyana have our full support for this resolution, as I close by saying every inch of this territory belongs to us. And I do believe we will make the reality of Dave Martin's song not one blade of grass. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear. Aubrey Norton speaking in Parliament on Monday evening and putting before the House his position, the position of the APNU AFC on the resolution. Let's bring in Mr. Norton and we're going to take it from there. Good evening, Mr. Norton.
Good evening to you, and good evening to your listening and viewing audience, David.
It's good to have you here at this time. And of course, here on Politics 101, we tend to go a little bit deeper. The Venezuelan issue is not a new issue. We know the 1899 arbitration that was settled, but in 1962, the Venezuelan reopened the issue. By 1966, Venezuela is taking over our part of Ancoco. By 1970, things got so bad that Mr. Dr. Eric Williams had to broker an agreement for a kind of pause in the rhetoric that was coming from Venezuela. When in 1982, and you referenced 1982, Mr. Burnham talking about 1982, when in 1982 that 12-year pause came to an end, the Venezuelans did not renew it. As I remember it, I think it was Mr. Campins, Herrera Campins, I think was his name, who was then the president of Venezuela. Ever since, Venezuela has kept this issue alive. They tried to keep Guyana out of the OAS. They tried to keep international companies from investing in the area. I remember the hydroelectric project by the PNC way back became a big issue for the Venezuelans. I'm saying all of that to say that this issue of Venezuela making renewed claim to our territory is not a new issue. And if we go back before 1899, what our viewers should know is that actually the British gave up a lot to Venezuela when they came to that 1899 agreement. So it's not like we took something from the Venezuelans. The British gave up. The British was claiming much more territory than eventually they settled with in 1899. I'm putting all of that in context because I think the historical framing of the issue brings more clarity. And so that there may be those who are trying to make political hay, if you will, and to score political points on this issue. The issue is not a new issue. And what I want to ask you, Mr. Norton, to start with, why this new round of saber rattling from Venezuela? Why this new round in 2023?
One has to recognize that in international relations, the domestic situation in a country contributes. Venezuela at this stage is experiencing a political, economic, and social crisis. In fact, the amount of migrants around the world from Venezuela is estimated to be more than 6 million. Now, what that means is that the crisis internally is pushing people out of Venezuela. At the same time, Venezuela, the president of Venezuela, Maduro, made an agreement in an attempt to have sanctions removed by the United States and others. They made a kind of an agreement to accommodate, for the want of a better phrase, free and fair elections. it is evident that his base has been eroded. And therefore, with the crisis, his base being eroded, the likelihood of him winning an election is questionable. It is well accepted in foreign policy theory and practice that when a country runs into a crisis, it seeks to turn their people in another direction. And I believe what in essence has happened here is that whenever the domestic situation is a difficult one for a president, that president tends to move in the direction of re-raising this issue. One also has to point out that Venezuela historically has continuously told the people of Venezuela that Essequibo belongs to them. So when it comes to the consciousness and the psychological preparation, Venezuela has prepared its people based on this lie. And so whenever there's an internal crisis, the government turns in the direction of becoming aggressive on the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. One of the interesting things, however, about this one is that the opposition itself is saying that this matter, the opposition in Venezuela is saying that this matter is before the International Court of Justice. And therefore, all this talk about a referendum is an attempt to distract. And that is good. But one has to recognize that this saber rattling that we're hearing at this stage is as a result of an attempt to distract from the internal situation to get support back in his base with the aim of winning the next elections. One has to always live with this reality that the internal situation in Venezuela tends to determine the level of rattlings you get on the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. Mind you, it has nothing to do with facts. It has to do with a perception that has been developed, that has taken root, and some would say become a phenomenon sui generis in the sense that it takes on a life of its own. And that is why I think it re-emerged at this stage. We have to add to that, like I said in my presentation, oil. Yeah. One has to recognize that Venezuela is greedy. You made the point that Guyana lost territory in the arbitral award of 1899. And having lost territory, both sides sign on. But now with the discovery of oil and the actual production, I believe it has developed an insatiable thirst by Venezuela to get hands on our oil and the wealth that will come from it. So I believe a combination of greed, the internal situation, and the extant international situation where they have to deal with sanctions and they want to get the support of the United States. Also, remember the US has interest here. And one of its interests is in accessing the oil. And so when one looks at all of those variables, one will see why they went in that direction. But I think the positive of it is that there are new interests which could counterbalance Venezuela. That is my assessment of what exists at this stage.
Aubrey, let me, and you're on point. Let me take you to another place. Here is the internal situation in Venezuela. Here is the geopolitical situation vis-a-vis Guyana. Large deposits of oil found in Guyana. The United States is relaxing its sanctions on Venezuela. The United States also, via its multinational corporations, have interest in both Venezuela and Guyana. In Guyana, we have a government that has shown a tendency to do anything to remain in power. Let me repeat that. We have a government in Guyana that has shown a tendency to do anything to remain in power. Is it possible that the Venezuelans are looking at all of these variables and are calculating maybe this is the best time to get something from Guyana? Not the 2/3, 5/8 of our territory that they're looking for. Could they, given all the factors and the variables that I mentioned there just now, be thinking we could get Guyana to give us something, to give us a channel to the Atlantic? We can get them to give up maybe a little piece of territory. Do you think that the Venezuelans are sensing a point of weakness here, or sensing a possibility of getting something that it can show its people? Look, we haven't gotten the big territory, but here is something that we've gotten.
When I met with the president, one of the things I did is I sought and got a commitment that we will be conceding not 1 inch of territory. And I did that because I recognize Venezuela is persistent. And since we had a politician who talked about giving a pathway out, I thought it was imperative that that be stressed. And so it was stressed, and in the presence of both teams, the government committed to ensuring not 1 inch of our territory, no concession will be made. I believe Venezuela would have factored that into their analysis. I think they would have factored our internal situation as well. I think they would have, in their analysis, they probably concluded that there was a possibility that the opposition wouldn't be with the government on it. And so I think they would have done those calculations. As opposition leader, it is incumbent on me that I ensure I make myself au fait with all aspects and as much of it as is possible. And so one of the things I've consistently done was to keep abreast with what is happening in the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. And so when the president called me, I didn't have to beat around the bush. I said, on this issue, we will be united. Now, I don't want that, I made it very clear. That must not be construed to mean that everything in Guyana is good. There are still things we have to fight for. But, like I said in my presentation in Parliament, you have to first own the territory to even fight of anything in it. And so it appears axiomatically to me that the opposition has to, and we have to continue to support the government. But at the same time, we should be making demands on the government to do the things that will strengthen our case. And in my presentation, I sought to do that. Identify things like recapitalizing the army, a public education program, a system of envoys to engage the diplomatic community, etc. Because one has to have a comprehensive approach to dealing with Venezuela. And so I do believe that they did their analysis and they concluded that this is the best time. But I also believe if they conclude that based on only Guyana's domestic factors and fail to analyze the geopolitical factors, then they were making a mistake. And as that came out, you would have seen the US, the Europeans, the OAS, all of them came out in support of Guyana because it is in their geopolitical interest at this juncture to do that. And we anticipated that support. But we are dealing in the rough world of international relations. And in the rough world of international relations, what matters is a country's interest. Let us not forget, before the Ukrainian war not occurred, and oil from Russia, etc., became a difficulty, we might have had a totally different situation. Now, with the Ukrainian war, the discovery of oil here, and the need for the protection of the American interests, and we must not fool ourselves. Every country puts his or her interests first. With those interests, I believe the confluence of interests balances in the favor of Guyana. It is for us now to understand the combinations and look at those combinations and work out our strategy to ensure that we benefit from the extant geopolitical situation, our local and Venezuela's local situation, to develop a strategy that allows us to succeed. And so that is my conception or perception of where we are and where we should be heading.
And of course, international relations is an extension of domestic politics. And so I'm going to bring you back there. When you met with the president, not all of your support base and your prospective support base agreed with you. And understandably so, because part of what we have socialized our base over the last 3 years to understand is that when you're dealing with the PPP, you're not dealing with an honest broker. I have come to the conclusion after my study of our political history of the last 60, 70 years, that when it comes to taking nationalist positions, whether it's taking us into the Federation, whether it's our relationship to CARICOM, whether it's our relationship to African liberation, whether it's a relationship to the non-aligned movement, I have come to the conclusion after studying that history, that the PNC has always had much more superior nationalist positions on these issues than the PPP. Now, all political parties, when they take positions on issues, they take into consideration how will this benefit the party. But my conclusion is that the PPP starts with how it benefits the party and ends with how it benefits the party. What that means is that as Venezuela comes around, the president calls you and said, Aubrey, you didn't shake me hand, but I want to meet with you on Venezuela. After saying, I'm meeting with you because you didn't shake me hand all the time. All of a sudden saying, you didn't shake me hand, but I want to meet with you on Venezuela. Understandably, part of your base is saying, they can't be serious. They're going to use our leader on this issue. And our leader should either not go, or if he goes, he should try to get some concessions out of the government. So my question is two-part. One, how do you answer your supporters who were reticent, and perhaps some of them still feel that you should not have gone in the first place? I know you've given part of that answer already, but speak directly to them. And secondly, when you went there, did you make demands? We know that one demand was made, and that was that you ask for the statistics as it relates to Venezuelan migrants in the country. So contrary to what some of us thought, that you went there and you lay down and didn't ask for nothing, you made demands, right? So the question is two-part. Talk your supporters through the importance of you going there, even at the risk of dealing with some group that is not an honest broker. And secondly, did you make demands other than the asking for the statistics in Venezuela? And are you satisfied that those demands have been met?
All right. Let me say, if you're the opposition leader, you have to lead.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm leader of the PNC, I have to lead. There will always be times when there are differences of opinion within your constituency. I remember when Burnham engaged the PPP and he wanted their support to get the 2/3. I think it was first to nationalize. And then the PPP gave critical support. People felt it wasn't full-fledged support. And so there were those who felt that Burnham, I want to give you another one. When the Geneva Agreement was going to be dealt with, Dr. Jagan was saying that, look, if you go to the Geneva, if you sign the Geneva Agreement, you are reopening the issue. And he argued that Burnham had a different view. Burnham said, if you sign it and you have this agreement, you create a legal corpus that will keep it within the confines of law. That turned out to be true, because now that it went to the ICJ, it's based on the Geneva Agreement. So it is evident now, in retrospect, that Burnham was right and Dr. Jagan was wrong. Now, having said that, fast forward to now, I've made it very clear that I believe the present government discriminates against us, African Guyanese community. It discriminates against Indo-Guyanese and Amerindians who support us. I have that message out there. It is known. We have argued that the allocation of resources in the state, by the state, seeks to enrich a few in the PPP, their friends, families, and favorites. Those are all positions out there. The shake hand issue, all I would say about it, I saw when the president said he wouldn't meet with me, etc. Well, you are big people in politics. Statements will be made. Forbes Burnham told us as young men, do not make absolute statements. I think the president's weakness is the making of an absolute statement, and therefore he has to go back on it. But we have got to be matured enough to know that this is a national issue. And I could have said, oh, the president saying meet him, he may want to meet him. That wouldn't serve our national interests. What must come first is our interests. I said in my presentation, we should put Guyana first. I am aware of the PPP's behavior. I mentioned previously on other programs that one of the reasons I didn't intend or avoid engaging is because the PPP has this tendency to engage. And once they finish engaging, they find a reason to get out, as they did to Robert Corbyn in constructive engagement, as they did to Desmond Hoyt after the 1997 elections, constitutional reform, etc. And so at the back of my head is the fact that this government cannot be trusted. That hasn't changed. But on the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy, which is critical, and which it is the PNC that put down the diplomatic infrastructure and developed the strategy to deal with Venezuela. This is an issue that we have always been in the forefront of and must own. But doing that does not mean we have to stop dealing with the treatment of our people about lands. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't fight the discrimination against the government. You have to make a tactical decision. The tactical decision is, how do you achieve both objectives at the same time? One, of expressing your support and solidarity with the government, while at the same time continue the fight for a better life for the people of Guyana. And so, what would I say to our supporters? I would say to our supporters, there is little or no positives to be had from saying no to the government and give the Venezuelan the impression that we are divided. So if they come over the border, we will be fighting ourselves rather than confronting them. First premise. The second thing I would say here is, as the leader of the PNC and the coalition, it is our task to speak to the issue. One of the reasons I spend a lot of time going through the issues in the parliament and ensuring our people understand it is so that they can get the gravity of it and be able to draw a distinction between support for the people of Guyana. We insisted it must not be support for the government, it's the government and people of Guyana, which we need to do. But at the same time, we will continue our struggle for a better life. And therefore, to those who would have said, you should have made these demands, when you make a political decision like I would have made, I had to look at the options. One of the options was to say you're doing support to the government, but at the same time make these demands. The PPP would have gone out there with their superior PR machinery and said, look, they don't have the interests of Guyana at heart. Here is an issue that we should be united on. But they are fighting over power and all kinds of nonsense. So, in making decisions, you have to look at the option. And the best option, I thought as leader, was for us to agree to give the full support and make demands within the confines of the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. And one of them is on migrants. We asked for a register. They provided something which is jokey and only will expose the incompetence, because they said in regions 6, 5, and 8, there are no Venezuelans. But I told the people in Aubrey to take out the Venezuelans as they meet them. So we'll show them that there are Venezuelans there. It is evident that they don't have a proper register. It is evident that there is an attempt by some in the PPP to use migration to save them politically. And so when we asked for the data, we were seeking to get information. It must be pointed out that also in that meeting, I did say that we hold the government, and I repeated in Parliament, accountable, and that they should not be the registration of one Venezuelan who isn't entitled to be registered. So the decision tactically that was taken is to restrict it to Venezuela. Had we not done that, you would have had at this stage a widespread PR program of how unpatriotic we are, etc. But we haven't done what we would have done. We have shown that we are matured. We have shown that we are supportive and genuinely supportive of the government. And therefore remove the option of them politicizing it. And people forget that I also called for and end up compromising on it for the establishment of a national commission on the frontiers, which would have, the minister tried to say that they got the ministerial one set up by Carl. I don't doubt that. The parliamentary committee, I don't doubt that. But the one we were calling for was going to be a commission that transcends that. And it would have involved the two political parties, but it would have also had a wider cross-section of Guyanese participation, which would have helped to hold the government and the opposition accountable. Now, those demands were made. In the days when I taught negotiations at the University of Ghana, I was very careful to tell people, as you negotiate, you have to think through everything and ensure at the end of the negotiations, your opponent don't have anything to use against you and get the upper hand. I believe we operated true to form on that. And we are at a position where we can, with the government, give leadership on this question of the Ghana-Venezuela territorial controversy, while simultaneously carrying the struggles of our people for a better life. To have placed the two together, I am of the view, would not have served the interests of the coalition or the Guyanese people. And the Guyanese people are first and foremost, and the coalition is also critical. That is my response to what you asked.
Aubrey, and thanks for those responses. Let's pivot in a familiar direction. One can't have an interview with you without going there. Aubrey Norton has been the most scrutinized leader of any of the two leaders in any of the two large parties, the most scrutinized. Partly because we're in the age of social media, that's a big factor. But there are also political factors and sociological factors. You took over the leadership of your party after it was ousted from power in controversial circumstances. Thirdly, you come from a strata in the society that traditionally leaders of the PNC haven't come from. When you take all those factors into consideration and the others that I have not listed, it is understandable that you must go through the scrutiny that you go through every day. At the end of the day, your support base, both real and prospective, imagine your support base wants to see the back of the people. There is one route to that, and that is election. Election was an issue, the electoral machinery was an issue in 2020. It remains the issue today. The opposition cannot look the people in the eye and say, look, we have tilted the situation in our favor in terms of guaranteeing that the rules of the game are agreed to by all of the stakeholders. I'm saying that to say, at the end of the day, your leadership would be judged partly and largely on whether you could acquire a particular an electoral architecture that guarantees the PNC, the coalition, an equal chance of winning an election. Am I wrong in that conclusion? And if I'm wrong, why?
when I became leader of our party and then the opposition, the United States, the British, the Canadians, the Europeans were not listening to us at all. One of my first tasks was to carve a strategy to engage them and to bring them to a point. But I should make this point first. I don't believe that we should rely on any foreign power to put you in power. But I have been a student of international relations, and I know the international environment has to be conducive for you to come to power. In fact, we lost power because the international environment wasn't conducive. We didn't do enough work to make it conducive. So one of the first tasks I would have had to undertake was to make the international community conducive. I don't want to get into the details as to how I did it, but you would know that we moved from a place where we were hardly engaged to a place where we are engaged. And even some of the things we are advocating, we are hearing coming out of the mouths of the diplomatic community. For that, we are thankful. And for me, that is a success of the party and the coalition. The second thing that happened, whether we like it or not, was that our support base felt that we came into government and we weren't in contact with our support base. And therefore, for me, one of the critical things I had to do was to re-engage the support base, reassure them that we are with you, we want you with us, and that on getting power, we will continue to engage them. We develop a strategy of engaging our support base, etc. And I think the local government elections would have shown that our support base showed trust in us, even fighting large sums of money. We were able to maintain our support base. The next important task was to begin to engage the non-traditional communities. Many of you would have seen me in recent times in what is considered to be PPP strongholds. I've been before, we didn't advertise it as much, but we're doing it much more regular now. If you look at the local government election results in places like Bushlot, where you will get 2 or 3 or 4 votes, I think we got 50-something votes. That showed that there is a movement away from the PPP. People might say 50 votes aren't enough. But 10 votes in 100 polling station is 1,000, if my math's correct. And so you have to widen the base. Now, I believe as a leader, I started from the position where I am not considered to be middle or upper class. One of the first things the PPP tried to do, especially Barra Jackdale, was to suggest that I was unintelligent, don't know anything about anything, and they carry that. I heard that he said, at least I know international relations, so he has shifted his position. For me, the task was to shift away from allowing the vice president and them to muse and engage them in serious policy formulation. And once you took them there, you saw Barrett start to dwindle away. So you are now building a perception that as a political party or movement, we understand the economy, we understand development, and we are putting out there our approach to development. I want to remind people, in the budget debate, they normally would say, oh, the government the opposition doesn't give solutions. And we gave them endless solutions. And so they found themselves in a position that was very difficult. Now, I am aware of the class nature of this society. And Aubrey Norton would be considered a simpleton, for the want of a better word. As a political scientist, I have to study what happened to our previous leaders. Robert Corbyn faced grave difficulties because of his class background and people's perception of him. As a person, I had to sit down. I born 36 Chote Part. Robert Corbyn born 36 Chote Part. I went to Mackenzie High School. Robert Corbyn went to Mackenzie High School. We have a similar background. Okay? Now, there are persons in the middle and upper class who attach certain approaches to leadership, which might not necessarily be leadership, but they attach it. For instance, if Burnham sat on a drinks box on Orange Walk, they will say he's the man of the people. Of course, he was considered professional, middle class, etc. If Aubrey Norton sits on a drinks box on Orange Walk, they tend to say you're ordinary. And so the greatest fight I would have had is, how do I stay with my people and operate at the leadership level? And I think we are succeeding. There are many in my party who would have said to me, look, you need to stop liming on President's line talk. You need to stop liming on Bamba Mali. When you're in Linden, you're on the market square. You're in a street liming with people. Now, I believe that is our strength. The strength of Forbes Burnham was his ability to be on the ground. His class position was slightly different from the class background that I would have come from. And so a lot of the criticisms you talk about come from that group that takes a classist position, a kind of elitist position. And even though you are categorized in a particular way, it doesn't change your reality. I also say this. If I could have been criticized for corruption, they would not have got to go to all the areas they went, me on Bamba Mali, etc. But because I have lived a life of avoiding corruption and giving no one the opportunity to legitimately, anybody could accuse you of corruption. You just got to say, no, I'm corrupt. In fact, I heard a man on Orange Walk say, oh, the PPP buy me out. I saw a comedian somewhere in England saying that the US ambassador directed me what to do. It's a lot of garbage. I have around me a number of professional people who I engage, get their views, listen to the ordinary people, and make decisions. Now, I also want to say this about scrutiny. One of the things that will affect the approach that I'm taking is that as a party, I think at one stage, a lot of people were coming into the party and fly to the top. What that means is they don't have the political groundings in the party. And when you get power, if you don't have political groundings, we will make the mistakes we made 2015 to 2020. I want to avoid that. I want us as a party to engage our people, serve our people. I understand the challenges. I know that I have to deal with the class position, but in my opinion, the first thing to do is to consolidate your base, is to be out there with the average man. I want to say this about the local government election. While there were a lot of intellectual analysis, I got a lot of my inspiration and ideas from ordinary people who might not articulate it as good as you or I can do. But if you listen to them, you understand what they want, and you can carry the struggle for them. Now, the objective is winning election. Let's not fool ourselves. The world has changed considerably. Now, we are challenging the electoral system. We are calling for biometrics and a clean voters list. We will continue to work for that. But we also have put a mechanism in place to monitor what is happening in the registration process. We also have got to train our people to monitor an electoral process, because even if you get a clean list and you can't monitor what is happening in polling stations across the country, you're going to end up in the same place. So it is not a one-prong approach. The other thing I want to say is this. I believe that particularly Jack Deo and the PPP, they are seeking to create conflict so that you have protests. You would recall I was overseas when I got the message that in the Quindon Bacchus struggle, we were going to come down the East Coast. And you would recall what I told you. I said, be careful when you pass in PPP strongholds, because they are going to use our people, put them in the protests, and then accuse African Guyanese of attacking Indians. By the time I went into the meeting and came out, I saw what had happened at Monrepo, I think it was. Yeah. And so we have to constantly understand what the PPP sets out to do. The PPP is losing grounds in its support base. And it is seeking to do two things. One, agitate so that there is an Afro-Indo conflict, which will rally the Indo-Guyanese back to them. And the second strategy they are using is to go into African Guyanese villages to seek support, and to, even if they don't get it, to appear to have it. So if they rig, they can say, we have African support. Now, as a leader, I have to analyze all of these issues, strategize, and give leadership. I believe I will always be criticized. Burnham was criticized. Hoyt was criticized. Corbyn was criticized. Granger was criticized. Who am I that wouldn't be criticized? And so I anticipate the criticisms, and I have no problem with them. But what I can say to you, I will give leadership in terms of analyzing the situation and carve the path towards victory rather than be emotional. I saw in a certain areas, they were saying they hope when we go to Parliament, we take off on the PPP and bring discrimination, etc. to the fore. To me, that was unwise. And those who did it clearly do not understand politics. Because what you do, you are virtually creating an opportunity for the PPP to attack this solidarity and unity at this stage. Sometimes we need to know the forum. I saw a person who appears to be anti-Norton saying, I should have had, using the exact words, the balls to call me by name. But as I understand diplomacy, you don't necessarily have to get into a personal conflict to achieve your objective. That person would have concluded that is she I was talking about, then it meant the message got out. There would have been little or no benefit in name calling. And so one other thing we must recognize, and I do as a political leader, there exists social media. And social media is a combination of fact and fiction. And you have got to unravel it and ensure you're on top of what is happening, because there are going to be a lot of fictitious things that come to you. Every day somebody sent me a picture with a set of boxes packed up like this. It's birth certificates for the Venezuelans. Now, let's assume that it's birth certificate for the Venezuelans. When I found out each packet can hold 500 birth certificates, it had about 25 packets. So by logical deduction, you could recognize that this has question marks. So I'm saying you have to analyze everything and point your people in a particular direction. I think at this stage, I am pointing our people in the right direction in terms of us achieving our objectives.
Aubrey, we agree that we were not going to drag this out, and we will not drag it out. We have crossed the rubric somewhat. But one last question before you go, because there are a lot of other questions that I wanted to tease out, but we will arrange for you to come back periodically. So we're not going to stress it. But one last thing. When I contacted you about coming on to this program, and I shared with you a note from a supporter of ours, and I get that kind of thing every day. I'm criticized by some of our own supporters who feel that I have taken a soft position vis-a-vis you and the formal opposition, and I take my licks on that. One of the criticisms that our people are making is that we support you publicly, in the sense that we don't attack you indiscriminately, but that you have not paid much attention to the broad opposition as a form of organization against the dictatorial government. I do remind the people that in the first few months of your tenure, we did put together an all opposition framework. We had a couple of meetings, one at Burnham Court, another one I think was at Golden Grove, and so on. That fell away. And I think one of the criticisms of you is that that's an area of work of the broad opposition, not just the parliamentary opposition, but the broad opposition forces that include political parties, other supportive elements, and so on and so forth, that it's an area that you have neglected. Please respond to that criticism.
All right, I wouldn't say I neglected it. You pointed out that we started. But the dilemma came when we were heading towards local government. Remember, local government was to be held before. The WPA had taken a position that they weren't participating. The AFC took a position that they weren't participating. Some people in our party took the position that they weren't participating. As leader of the party, having analyzed the situation, and I said this to you personally, I have no problem with you all not participating, but I cannot see it is in our interest to not participate and leave the floor open for the PPP to take all the local government council. The only grounds on which I would have not participated is if we were sure there were going to be no elections. But once there were going to be elections, I felt, from my understanding of politics in Ghana and the Caribbean, I would have looked back at Jamaica and see at one time when they didn't participate and all the seats went to a political party, what happened? I think it happened in Barbados at one time. And the very PPP didn't participate in Guyana in the 70s. And we saw what happened. And so, from my historical analysis of the evolution of these things, I felt, even though it was an unpopular decision, as leader, I would have taken the blame and I said this to the central executive of the party, I, Aubrey Norton, was prepared to take the blame and resign if I was wrong. I took the opportunity and galvanized the forces. May I state, there were many among us in our party who didn't believe and only actually get active when they recognized that the people on the ground were active and supporting us. And so that period resulted in us operating as APNU alone. GAP, which is the other key member of the APNU, operates in the interior, and they weren't, as a party, participated. Because remember, it is only LETEM and one or two other places that had NDC. All the others are two shows running them, etc. So what happened is we had to put all the focus on doing the best we can in local government. And remember, we were challenging $1 billion, billions of dollars being fed to our people, bribery, corruption. But we had to ensure we go into those elections and win. You imagine what Georgetown, I noticed what is going on with the First Lady of the Seawalls. I'm ending up out there. You imagine if they had Georgetown City Council. Our support base would have been dead. I come now to the issue. I accept responsibility for not operating as a joint opposition. And I think I said to you, in December, I am prepared to begin to do the work again for the joint opposition. One of the respects I have for Robert Corbyn, or one of the areas I respect him considerably in, is the effort he put into creating coalition. He might not be popular, but for those of us who are in the internal dynamics of it would know the success of us 2015 to 2020 rests squarely on the work that Robert Corbyn did. Between 2000 and I think it's 2001, he became leader, and when he was no longer, I think, in 2011. And it is a tradition I hope that we can continue and build on. And I said to the Guyanese people, we will deal with it. You know the WPA had left, and that generated its own problems. We have solved that. We say we can move forward. We might not be able to use AP and UAFC. We might now have to talk about joint opposition until we rekindle whatever it is. And so for that element, I will take the blame. I have no problem accepting the blame. And I would say to you, I'll be in the forefront of resolving it.
Aubrey Norton, leader of the opposition, is spending some time with us tonight and dealing with a couple of issues. I know many of you wanted us to deal with a lot more, but of course time has run out. And I will work with Aubrey and his team to get him to come periodically on the program to engage these issues. I'm glad that some of you in the audience have recognized that we on this program bring a different angle. And it is not that we are worse or we are better than others, but I always believe that when you are fighting towards the same goal, you must come at it from different perspectives. I do not want to replicate what Sherrod is doing and what Mark is doing and what Rick Ford is doing and what Norman Brown is doing. I would want to bring a particular angle to it. And I am glad that you all are happy that we had Mr. Norton really deal with the issues from a different perspective tonight. And we hope to continue that.
But David, David, if you may permit me.
Yes.
I remember when the issue with Takuma came.
Yes.
There were those who were saying to me, you have to do this, you have to condemn that. And you know what ended up in the public domain. But I had to make a decision that I thought is in the interest of the struggle. And what I did say at the time was that, in my opinion, Takuma was saying the truth about Guyana. He might have used the wrong language. And I saw people saying all kinds of things about me. Desmond Hoyt used to tell us in a room, when you're leader, you got to get a thick skin. I want to reassure you I have a thick skin and will do what is necessary to achieve our objectives.
Aubrey, thank you very much. And that would be your last word here. As I said, I'll work with you in trying to squeeze in some programs here and there in the.
I am disposed. I am disposed and willing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you in the audience for coming out tonight. I notice you all have come out in your large numbers. As I have always said, this struggle, all of us are in this struggle. Each of us brings something unique to the struggle. And so therefore our struggle is dynamic and will yield the kind of dynamic results when we take advantage of our diversity. We in the Working People's Alliance have a particular approach to politics that may be slightly different from others, but the objective is the same. We want a Guyana that is a free Guyana, that is an inclusive Guyana, that is a fair Guyana, that is a just Guyana. It's a respectful Guyana, where whether you're Indian or African or Amerindian, Chinese or Portuguese or mixed or European, that we have respect for each other and we respect the diversity of our perspective. Our Guyana, we have argued, continues to be one of the most progressive places on earth. It's one of the few places, I was reminded by Professor Clive Thomas, that over the years, progressive ideas of whether they be nationalization or joint shared governance or cash transfers, or, non-alignment, African liberation, whatever the progressive issue, Guyana has always been a hospitable place. And we continue to strive for that. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Tomorrow night, we continue our series on race, ethnicity, and politics. Tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about race, ethnicity, and politics in Guyana. The myths and the truths. The myths and the truths. Come back tomorrow night as we continue our discussion on these pertinent issues. Love is the watchword.